This episode is brought to you by our affiliate Gemini. Gemini is a well-respected cryptocurrency exchange started by Cameron and Tyler Winklevoss. If you're interested in purchasing Bitcoin, Ethereum, or other altcoins, please check out their website at gemini.sjv.io/Moontower to learn all about it. Welcome back, everybody, to another edition of the Moontower Business Podcast. This is your host, Joseph Obel. And today I have this pleasure of speaking to Bill Berman, who is the CEO of Berman Leadership Development. Bill, welcome back to the podcast. How are you?
I'm great, Joe. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too. Excited to have you back, and want to talk about a few different topics here, but maybe we can just get started by introducing yourself to listeners and just tell listeners a little bit about yourself for folks that haven't heard our previous podcast.
Absolutely. So I'm a executive coach and leadership development consultant. My firm, Berman Leadership Development, has been around for about 17 years. And we specialize on individual and team-focused coaching, leadership development, developmental assessments, and talent management. So we're a growing business. We focus on almost any industry, but we do a lot in pharmaceuticals and a lot in financial services, and asset management, consumer products, and information services. And what we do is custom design either coaching engagements or development engagements for our customers and help them to build the right talent pipelines and the succession plans and make sure their leaders are building high-performing teams.
Gotcha. So my understanding is you're based out of New York City. Is that right?
We're based in New York City, but I have consultants in multiple cities, both in the U.S. and in Europe. So we have consultants in San Francisco, in Chicago, in Boston, in D.C., in Atlanta, in St. Louis. Pretty much anywhere. I have a couple of people I work with in Houston and Dallas, and London, and a couple of European countries as well.
Gotcha. So do you work with leaders kind of all over the country, maybe in different countries as well?
Well, and most companies these days don't have a single location where they work. They've got, their headquarters may be in New York, but they've got their finance people in Austin. They've got their R&D group in Silicon Valley, and they've got their business development people in Chicago. So, most companies these days are multi-location, or they're just virtual altogether these days. I have a couple of clients who have just gone completely virtual.
Right. Yeah, that's totally what I've been hearing and seeing as well. Can you kind of give an example of a couple? We don't have to give names of your clients, but just kind of industries and just kind of some of the stuff they're working on.
So I've got a very fast growing biopharmaceutical company that I work with. They're developing cutting edge medicines, both what are called small molecule medicines and biotechnology based, so gene editing type medicines. And we're working with a variety of people at the VP and senior VP level because the organization's growing, so they need to change how they do things, where they do things, and who they do them with to manage the growth. So what they were doing at $500 million doesn't work anymore at $5 billion. I've got another company that's probably about 1,000 employees. They're an asset management group, and they do investing for their clients and sort of finance deals that come along. And again, we're helping. These are a very technologically sophisticated group. But they aren't accustomed to having done a lot of leadership and management. So we're really helping their people up their game in terms of how they manage the people who work for them.
Excellent. That's pretty interesting. So it sounds like you got a mix of different clients that you work with. One of the topics I'd like to discuss today is the Great Resignation. People, been reading a lot about that in the news. People are just quitting their jobs for various different reasons, whether it's finding a different opportunity to work from home, whether they just become entrepreneurs. A lot of people are getting involved in different stuff and making a lot of money in cryptocurrency, you name it. There's a lot of different reasons that people are making transitions from their typical job roles to something else. What are you seeing on your end with regard to the Great Resignation, and what are you hearing and seeing from leaders that you work with in that space?
I think at a fundamental level, the employment world has shifted from a buyer focused model to a seller focused model. So it's really the employees have the upper hand a lot of the time these days, because obviously that depends on the field you're in and what you're trained to do. But in technology, in services, and a variety of different things, your people have the ability to go other places. As you know, there are a lot more jobs being posted than there are people to fill them in particular industries and sectors. So if you've got those skills, you can pretty much write your ticket for wherever you want to go. So people aren't putting up with difficult bosses. They aren't putting up with being treated unfairly. They aren't putting up with places that say, oh, you have to be in at 7 and stay here for 12 hours. They want more flexibility in their life. And I've had 2 conversations this week with people who have said to me, one whose kids are 16 and 18, and the other one whose kids are 2 and about to be born. And they have both said to me, over the past 2 years, I've spent more time with my kids than I ever thought I would have spent. And they said, I don't want to give the one with the babies said, I don't want to give that up. I don't want to go back to seeing them for 30 minutes before they go to bed. I just don't want to do that. And the one whose 6 kids are 16 and 18 says he's got this incredibly close relationship with his kids and he doesn't want to give it up. So I think people are seeing that there's a real benefit to not being in the office from 7 to 7, 5 days or a week, and then working on the weekends. So I think they want something different. And that's what I'm seeing a lot of is people who can want something different. I think there's another group of people who realized that they were working for a job that brought home $40,000 and spending $35,000 on childcare. And so, why bother? Right? It just wasn't worth it for them. So I think there's a whole group of women out there, particularly women, who we're going to have to get them back into the workplace. We're going to have to treat them differently.
No doubt. And I think especially in big cities, people have long commutes, hour plus commutes each way. If they can find opportunities to work from home and use their time otherwise, people are going to do that, right?
I never would have written my book, Influence and Impact, if it hadn't been for COVID, because I was commuting 12 hours a week, at least. And when COVID hit, I had all this extra time, and so I used it to write a book.
That's awesome. So how big a problem do you think this is for companies and organizations? Just, people just finding different opportunities.
It varies from industry to industry. So there are industries where you don't have that choice. I was talking about the biopharmaceutical firm that I work with. The people who work in their labs, they don't have a choice. They have to go into the office. My son, who works in an oil refinery, he has to go into the office. He can't do that remotely, or certainly not most of the time. But there are other people who have enormous flexibility and can choose, really could work from anywhere. And what I've heard from a number of the people I work with is that they don't think that the productivity of their employees have gone down. They think maybe even it's improved a little, but people's relationship to them, their relationship to the company, their connection to the company is less, and their connection to the people is less. So it becomes easier for them to say, I don't want to do this anymore. I got a better offer over here, because there's none of those human contacts that are holding them to that company.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I totally agree with that thought process. Um, in terms of talent management and employee retention, what do you think is the best way for companies and organizations to kind of handle that this year in 2022 and going forward as I guess the pandemic you know gets better and things start to normalize more over the next few years? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the first thing you have to do is be clear about what you want to do and why you want to do it. So if you want everybody in the office and you think that's the right thing, don't just bang your fist and say everybody's back in the office. Tell them why you think that's important. Tell them what they're going to get by being in the office. What's the benefit to them? So, in my generation, it didn't matter what the benefit to me was. The benefit was I got paid, right? And and that was enough. But it's not enough anymore. So, if you want people to be flexible, tell them why you're being flexible. Don't just do it, and I think most of the companies I'm talking to, they're not going to be 100% work from home. It's going to be hybrid. So people are going to be coming in a day, 2 days, 3 days a week. So the more you are clear about why and what the benefit is and how it's going to be helpful to them and their career, I think the more effective you're going to be. The more directive and controlling and non-partnering you are with your employees, the worse it's going to get for you.
That makes sense. Do you think that 5 years from now or more that we'll get back to pre-pandemic normal in terms of people going to the office full time and things things are where they were at offices generally?
That's not my sense. When I talk to the people I talk to, and these are people in financial services, in technology, in healthcare, in pharmaceuticals, they're saying that depending, even in hospitals, if you're not direct service provider, why do we need office space for you? Why can't you work from home? Or why can't we set it up so that there's a place for you to go a day or 2 days a week? They don't. I don't think that unless you're providing a service that has to be done in person. So, and we're even learning that some of those things that we thought had to be done in person don't. I just had a doctor's appointment where we did it over the phone, and we had a video conference, and he accessed my medical record online, and I sent him pictures of things, and he looked at things, and I did tests, and it worked fine. So I think there are things that we're going to discover that can be done online and done virtually that 10 years ago we would have said there's no way that'll ever happen. So I don't think we're going to go back to the way it was. I think there's a new world out there, and I think those of us who don't move along with us are going to get pushed out very quickly.
I agree with you, and I think that's in every industry. I'm an attorney, and I've seen that a lot of courts in the state of Texas, I'm sure all over the country, are holding most of the hearings virtually via Zoom. And so, for attorneys that practice all over the state of Texas or different states, I'm in Austin. Before I'd have to drive 3 hours or take a flight to Dallas to attend a court hearing there. I can just get on Zoom and it's 10 minutes and I'm done and I can get back to my day. And so I can see in the future, different court hearings and things related to the legal profession being handled via Zoom or virtually going forward.
Well, and that has financial implications both for the law firm and for your customers, for your clients. Because if you're not traveling an hour to the each way to the court and then sitting for 2 hours waiting for the judge to be ready for you, that's 4 hours that you've saved your client in terms of fees, or 4 hours that you can charge to somebody else. So it really has real long-term implications for people.
That's right. Totally agree. How has COVID, the pandemic, generally kind of affected your business and the Berman Leadership Development organization?
I've been unbelievably lucky. There was in early 2020, there was a bit of a drop off, when people were sort of panicking. But executive coaching and team development is being done online more and more. We've discovered that if you want to do a business focused team meeting, you can do that virtually. If you want to build relationships and get people to know each other and get people really comfortable with each other, that still is much better done in person. There's really no substitute for doing things together, for having meals together, for solving problems together in person. We're relationship focused people for the most part, but my business has been growing. I think coaching has become an even more important aspect of the whole talent management picture. I think that typically what clients have done is they do these group trainings, and that's always a one size fits all. The reason people like coaching for their high potentials in particular is that it's customized for each individual. So we're not going to, if your issues are around developing people, we're not going to spend a lot of time on strategy. Whereas if we're doing a training program, we're going to spend a third of our time on strategy and a third of our time on people and a third of the time on personal management, whether that's what you need or not. So I think it's people experience it as more efficient for them.
Gotcha. So I guess you've been able to reach probably maybe more clients now that a lot of business is being conducted kind of virtually.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, a lot of our clients they're not just sitting in an office, they're on the road. When they're attorneys, they're in court, they're at client sites. When they're in pharmaceuticals, they're on the road, or they're in team meetings, or they're overseas with an international group. We can still have the meetings and have our sessions, and it works just fine. Whereas before, those would get canceled or rescheduled or missed. So I think people feel much more comfortable with it. And for some people, they can doing it from home provides them with much more confidentiality than doing it in the office did. So
that's great. I love it. How about in terms of the leaders that you're working with now? What are some of the kind of the biggest common challenges that they're dealing with generally, and then some of the challenges they're dealing with just related to the pandemic that you've seen?
Well, there's almost everybody I work with, their business is changing in some way, shape, or form. There's a different, either deals are being done online instead of in person, or people want to see different things, or the way their clients are working is different. So that's changed. And I think people are having to adjust the way they do their business to adapt to what's happened with the pandemic. And I think the biggest change is how they interact with their employees and how they communicate with their employees and what they tell them. I think if we thought that we were moving toward a employee focused approach to business before the pandemic, I think it's jumped an order of magnitude differently. So people are having to spend much more time dealing with their employees, making it clear why their employees should be working for that company. So they're struggling a lot with that. I think the other issue that I've seen with a lot of clients is they feel that the marketplace is changing very rapidly, and they're the whole notion of having a long-term strategy has to incorporate much more flexibility and agility than it used to. So I think the notion of strategic agility has become increasingly important. And I think the notion of emotion regulation and self-regulation has become really important, because a lot of people have experienced the pandemic as having somewhat of a negative impact on people's social skills. They're more irritable. Their frustration comes up quicker. They're less patient with other people. They're less tolerant of differences, not whether that's political or COVID or what it's caused by. I think people are having to work harder to communicate effectively and build relationships with people and be respectful of differences, and still be able to move forward. So I think that's the whole issue of equity and diversity And inclusion is another dynamic that I'm seeing almost all of my leaders focused on. They want to know, how are they going to manage this effectively? How do they deal with unintentional discrimination or intentional discrimination? How do they handle bias? How do they make sure that people are being heard and felt that they're being heard? I think that's a third part of what's going on at the same time.
Gotcha. How about in terms of leaders that are kind of in new roles, like somebody that's become a CEO or a CFO for the first time in a company, that are just kind of new to an organization? What kind of challenges are you generally see from folks like that?
It falls into that category of agility. If you I've worked with a couple of people who have come into their organization, are leading a team or leading a whole division or organization, and they've never met these people. They've never seen them in person. And I think managing and leading when you don't have direct contact with people is way different than when you could walk around, when you could literally walk the halls and see people. I work with one organization where pre-pandemic, if you didn't walk the floors and talk to people, there was something wrong with you. It was just inherent in the culture. Well, they haven't been able to do that for 2 years. So how do you lead in that organization? So it's become very difficult for people to figure out, how do you lead when you don't know the people? Now, some organizations have figured that out because there have always been global organizations that had to lead people in multiple locations. But the vast majority of businesses are in one, maybe two locations. And so this notion of not being in touch with people is just not core to how they grew up, how they learned to manage. So that's they're really struggling with that.
Gotcha. Yeah, we're living in interesting times. It's going to be interesting to see kind of things, how they play out, and how things progress in the coming years.
Well, Alvin Toffler years ago talked about the pace of change increasing. And that's exactly what we're seeing now, is whether it's a technological change or an attitude change, or a culture change, these things, instead of taking years or decades to happen, they're now taking months. And things are transforming what feels like overnight. And that's very hard to deal with, particularly for people who didn't grow up that way. I think younger people are having an easier time with those kinds of changes than people who are, say, over 30.
There's been a lot of bad things that have come from the pandemic, but also a lot of good things. And it's really interesting to kind of to highlight and kind of study those things that came out of this pandemic, and that are benefiting people kind of all over the world.
I think it's going to be as transformative as any of the other major points in time that we've dealt with. So, the assassinations of the early 60s, 9/11 was transformative. I think this is at least as wars, obviously. I think this is going to be at least as transformative and permanent as any of those things.
No doubt. You wrote a book, Influence and Impact. I have a copy. I've read it. I think it's a great book. You've been on the podcast before to talk about that book, but for listeners that have not heard that episode, can you just speak a little bit about the book, what it's about, and kind of why you wrote it?
Absolutely. So the reason I wrote the book is because I've probably coached 300 people over the past 20 years. And the reason at least half of them struggle is because they either don't really understand what the job is, what's expected of them, or they don't understand the culture they're operating in. And people decide what their job is either based on what they thought the job description was, or what they're comfortable with, or what they want to avoid, or what they wish their job would be. And a lot of times they're 60, 70, 80% right, but that last 20% is really problematic for them. So it really, people need to spend the time learning about what the organization needs, what their boss needs, what the team needs, what their boss's boss need, and really focus on those stakeholders, not just on their job description or what they like doing. And those are sometimes small changes, but they can make a huge difference. The other piece is people come in with a certain style, a certain approach. And on the one hand, they want to be accepted as who they are. But on the other hand, you have to adjust to the culture that you're working in. If you go to Japan and you try to act like a usual American and eat American food and behave in an American way, it's going to be very difficult for you compared to if you learn a little bit about Japanese culture and learn how those people operate and how they interact and how they deal with each other and adapt to that. So it's that cultural adaptiveness is a big part of what the book focuses on. So how do you fit with what the organization wants and needs and can embrace? So that's what and when you do that, you gain influence, because influence fundamentally comes from being the can-do person who solves problems, who helps get things done, and who's on our side. That's what people look for, and those are the people who can influence other people. So you have to be able to do the job, you have to be able to do it consistently, and you have to do it in a way that other people can accept. And that gets you a seat at the table. And then you can start doing things that really influence and impact other people. If you don't have that expertise and execution and empathy for the organization, you don't even get a seat at the table. So the whole book is designed to help people move up, get a seat at the table, have more influence, get appreciated for what they do, and get the recognition that they deserve.
I think the lessons and the concepts in this book are applicable to folks that are working in any type of organization. I think it kind of can fit, anything from a startup company to enterprise to just kind of any organization. Is that what you think too?
Absolutely. And I think it works for first line managers. I think it works for VPs, and I've seen it work with CEOs of organizations. I think it's just making sure you understand where you are and what's needed from you. And there are clear steps in the book. There are clear worksheets in the book that will help you get there.
What kind of feedback are you getting from readers so far?
I get a lot of great feedback. I've talked to people who have used it and said this was incredibly helpful. I've talked to coaches who've given the book to their clients and used it as the way they're helping them, they're coaching them. And I've talked to a number of HR leaders who say this is a great resource for us. So getting a lot of positive feedback. Gotcha.
Great. Well, is there anything else that you would like to highlight about your book or about your business to listeners that we haven't covered?
Well, I just wanted to say, I have a blog on my website, so you can go there and you can read pieces that are related to the book or other thoughts I have about leadership. You can sign up for that on the website. You can get access to the book on the website. Or you can follow me on Twitter at Dr. Bill Berman, or on LinkedIn also at Dr. Bill Berman.
Excellent. Well, I'll put the links to your website and your social media on the show notes so folks can follow you. Then I have a final couple of questions for you. Number one is, what is your favorite book? And then number two is, you're in New York City. What's your favorite restaurant in New York City?
So my favorite book these days is a book called Team of Teams by Stanley McChrystal. I think it's a great discussion of how you break down barriers and overcome silos and individual needs to achieve a greater goal. So that's one of the most recent books I've been reading. My favorite restaurant is, I have to say, it's Restaurant Daniel Boulud's restaurant. I got to know, because of COVID, I got to know the general manager there. And that's a long story that I'll tell you another time, but because of that, I really enjoy going there, and the food is spectacular.
That's awesome. Next time I'm there, I'll see if I can get a reservation. That sounds great. Bill, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, chatting with me again about the things you're working on. I really appreciate your time, and I wish you the best of luck. And I'd love to have you get on the podcast sometime.
Joe, thanks for having me. I really appreciate being on your show anytime.
Thank you so much.
This episode is brought to you by our affiliate Gemini. Gemini is a well-respected cryptocurrency exchange started by Cameron and Tyler Winklevoss. If you're interested in purchasing Bitcoin, Ethereum, or other altcoins, please check out their website at gemini.sjv.io/Moontower to learn all about it. Thank you.